Okay, thanks, Matt. So you can see we had a colourful discussion, if nothing else. So the question here was really about how stakeholders can be involved in providing results in terms of driving programmes forward. And I suppose we in terms of the discussions within the group, we recognise firstly that we have a series of different programmes which are at various stages, and also I suppose the most important differentiator or distinguishing feature between the various programmes are that not so much the nature of the programmes themselves, but some are at a voluntary phase and some are currently in a compulsory phase, and that those two are very different beasts essentially. So in terms of the discussion, it tended to focus more around the programmes that are voluntary and how those can be taken forward potentially to a compulsory footing, but at least toward eradication. And as a starting point, we fleshed out the range of stakeholders that actually are involved, and you can perhaps just about see those represented here, starting with the farmer, but really a broad range of stakeholders beyond that, both within the farm gate and also outside the farm gate, including at the end of the supply chain, or at least the consumption chain, the consumer themselves, but also retailers and processors being involved in that. In terms of the actual involvement of those stakeholders and the messages, I suppose there was a few key points that come out, but really in terms, I think, of the voluntary programmes, the steps that sort of tended to come forward were there was a chicken and egg in terms of if we need legislation to take things forward, how do we actually build the level of engagement to do that, and that was a sort of a common theme. I think a recognition that if we want to deal with something at the individual herd level, then a voluntary programme can do that, but to do it at a national level, it needs to ultimately move to a compulsory footing. There was various discussions around, well, what level of engagement do we actually need, from 30 to 60 to 90% before we would get legislation to support that, and indeed what the legislation would actually look like as well. But some of the themes behind that then, in terms of data sharing, in terms of the provision of database and the sharing of information in there, and particularly the role perhaps of auctioneers, and that having been exemplified, I think, in the Scottish programme, albeit in a legislative context, but where the auctioneers there took forward sharing of data, or that coordinating role in terms of animal statuses. I think just to flick over. Yeah, there was some discussion then as well about the role of various parties, and in terms of the drivers, so if we're to get to whatever X is in terms of percentage engagement, what are the key drivers that are actually going to get that there, and ultimately those drivers in encouraging farmers to engage at the first instance, but also recognition that potentially there are lots of either individual veterinary practice or practice groups who are engaged with their own clients with BVD control, and there's also potentially a need for engagement or motivation for those various programmes which are running and which are delivering success at a more local level to engage and to share with the programme database, or to actually engage. And certainly the costs associated even with uploading of those being seen as a disincentive to participating in that. Yeah, and I think we're on to yeah. So some of the other dairy farms been, generally speaking, more engaged, and perhaps dairy practitioners more engaged, more ready uptake with dairy farmers, in part that being driven by cost as much as anything else. But I think those are probably the key points. We really didn't get to the end of the question. I think because there are so many different stakeholders and so many different situations that pertain across the different programs. But that key one of driving engagement, I think, was really the message coming through with the potentially the nirvana, at least, of reaching legislation as an aid to subsequent eradication. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Matt.